That's just about everybody. I think we're missing Don Hallman and Mary Alice Nadu. They always have to walk through the door later if they're coming at all. This is our second seminar of the year. We've got a third one lined up for May the 10th. Dr. Brooks is going to talk again about one of his many subjects he can talk about. But he is an interesting. So if you're looking for 3 more professional development hours, we'll have another one on May 10th. I'll try to send the announcement out early next week. And we do have a plant tour coming up on the 16th of May. But the ASCO folks asked that we give them the names 2 weeks in advance. So if anybody's interested, next Friday is one of the days we need your name in and your company affiliation. Response has been kind of light, so I think I'm going to open it up to not just the ASB members, but all the seminar attendees. But it will be first come, first served, because we're only allotted 24 spots.
When is it? When is it?
It's it's on Friday at 9 a.m.
Yeah, May 16th.
At American Switch Company. Yeah, May the 16th.
Automatic.
So we've got those 2 events coming up, and today we've got John Steimke that's going to talk to us. He has his doctorate in chemical engineering from Houston University of Houston, where he got his doctorate. And he's worked in the chemical industry. He's worked at Savannah Riverside. He's recently retired. He's grandfather of 3 grandchildren. And I think later in his career he got interested in fuels and biofuels, and has done a lot of research and reading up on the subject, and he's going to talk to us about how to make biofuels and I guess the advantages and disadvantages. So with that, Dr. Brown.
Thanks.
Oh, one more thing. I guess I'll do it now. Here's the, I'm going to pass this around, so if you lose your certificate, you write your name in and just sign it, and I'll scan this in on my computer, and I'll have a record of your attendance just in case you lose the certificates. We'll take 2 breaks, one at about 10 o'clock, one about 11 o'clock, when it's a good breaking point. So with that, Dr. Simon.
Okay. And if somebody's got a question or a comment, then just we'll stop for a minute.
Oh, there is a basketball tournament going on upstairs.
I thought it was a senior
I thought it was a drum court.
Yeah, youth sports has gotten crazy. Not only is there recreation and grade school sports, now there's these separate travel sports.
So we got a gym above us, huh?
So there's a gym over
Yeah.
gym. So hopefully that won't distract us too much.
Did everybody get an outline? I think all right, so we'll start with the introduction and overview. Well, everybody knows the oldest biofuel is firewood. And for thousands of years, man has used animal fat, vegetable fat, and beeswax for illumination. Liquid motor fuels have been around for about 100 years. I found it interesting that diesel's first fuel was peanut. And of course, today there's significant consumption of conventional biofuels. Wood, dried cattle dung in Africa and Asia. Savannah Riverside burns wood chips as boiler fuel. And local brick companies sometimes have the option to burn sawdust, depending on the price of the sawdust, to fire bricks. And I'm going to tell you a story that's somewhat related to biofuels. I like this story. I hope you like it. Some of you know Zafar Qureshi. He worked at the plant for many years. He was born in Pakistan. And his father had owned Qureshi Typing College in a small town in Pakistan. He was also the dean of students, the only instructor, and the typewriter repairman. And when Zafar was a teenager, his father recruited him to be director of advertising for their typing college. So they had 2 old bicycles, and he and his brother would tie a ladder between the 2 bicycles and ride the bikes about 10 miles and find a wall. And they wouldn't ask anybody's permission, but they would paint on the wall to Qureshi Typing College. But this is where the biofuels came in. Farmers would slap cow dung against his freshly painted sign to dry for fuel. And as often we fuss at, fuss at. So I like that story. Well, this is part of an overview. The oil embargo in 1973 generated interest in energy independence and renewable motor fuels. But I think everybody knows one of the first approaches to biofuels was corn-based ethanol, because all the technology was existing. Initially, this approach was quite inefficient in many ways, and it's somewhat more efficient now, although corn ethanol, in my opinion, is just not very attractive. If we're going to pursue this, we need to go to another ways. The embargo also initiated the first DOE-sponsored work on algae as a source of fuel. Well, research on climate change has re-energized interest in biofuels. Most global energy consumption is still from fossil fuels. I'll show you some graphs on this. But there's an increasing production of renewable energy. I'm going to say some words about comparing energy fluxes. And also on prices. Current market prices for biofuels are usually higher than for fossil fuels. But there are hidden costs to fossil fuels. For instance, maintaining a U.S. fleet in the Persian Gulf, and potential cost of global flooding of coastal areas in coming decades. Well, in renewable energy, solar energy is the ultimate source. And the solar energy falling on Earth in hour is about equal to our total annual consumption. So the potential is there, but how to get at it. So here's some annual energies. The solar flux is almost 4 million exajoules. The potential energy in wind is over 2,000 exajoules. The potential energy that you could get out of biomass is as much as 300 exajoules. Now, our primary energy consumption here for 2010 was 539 exajoules. And electricity was 66 exajoules. I've got a plot here of global energy demand, and the world energy demand has almost doubled since 1980. Okay, so North America and Europe actually haven't increased that much. The big increase has been in Asia and Oceania.
If you were to plot that versus population growth.
That's a good question. I don't have that, but I'm sure there would be a connection. So here's the total energy mix for 2010, and this is fossil fuels, so coal, oil. Here's nuclear, and then this is renewables, and then here are the renewables, and most of the renewables is people burning wood and such for heating homes and cooking food. And then the other is the second biggest, well, a big one here is hydropower. That's not surprising, that's renewable. And then two other large ones are ethanol and wind power. The others are pretty small. And then here's world energy consumption. You can see the increases for oil and coal and gas. And here's hydro. Nuclear actually took a small downturn in the last few years. And renewable is started to increase. of the big biofuels now is biodiesel. And the Europeans are much more interested in biodiesel than we are. Here are European nations, and this is for 2007, 8, and 9. And so they are dominating the production of biodiesel. Here's the US and Canada, Argentina, Brazil, and the whole rest of the world.
In the previous slide, coal seemed to be taking a large uptick in turn. Is that just because it's easy to get at?
It's easy to get back at. If you don't look at air pollution and climate change issues, it's the way to go. But
Is it just convenience? Is that much being used in? I mean, that's obviously China.
that's China, right? The Chinese are building a lot of coal plants. They're burning a lot of coal. But yeah, they have a lot of coal. It's easy to get at. It's easy to ship. It's easy to burn. But the other big player is ethanol. And this is the reverse situation. The U.S., here's U.S., and the U.S. is very interested in ethanol. And the second biggest player is Brazil. Here is Brazil. The Europeans are, and the other countries, the other regions are much less interested in ethanol. Okay, next section is on vegetable-based feedstocks. So I'll go through some feedstocks. Sugarcane is a very important source for ethanol. Grows best in a tropical climate like Caribbean or Brazil. You squeeze the stalks to get juice that could be 20, the juice could be 20% sucrose, take sugar. So you boil the juice down to sugar crystals and molasses. One concern with sugarcane is a limited shelf life for the cane itself or for the freshly squeezed juice. If you turn it into sugar crystals, of course, it will last a long time, but limited life for the others.
What was your previous slide?
Oh, I must have skipped over that. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to divide the vegetable-based feedstocks into sucrose sources, starch sources, oil sources, lignocellulosic sources. But another way to look at it is that there are 3 generations of feedstocks. The first generation is sugar, starches, and oils that can be used as food for people or livestock. The second is woody materials or oils that are not generally used as food. And the third generation is new feedstocks, microbes, algae. So thanks for catching that. Okay, so another source of sugar is sugar beets. They grow well in a temperate climate, so they grow them in the US and Canada. Once again, they contain about 20% sucrose. It's the same sucrose you get from the sugar cane. And you process it very similarly to sugar cane. Another one is sorghum. And my understanding is there are 2 types of sorghum. There is a grain sorghum that provides starch like corn, and a sweet sorghum that provides sugar like cane or beets. It requires warm weather. You can grow it in the southern U.S. And it's drought and heat tolerant.
Where does sorghum come from?
I think it's a native of Africa, and it was brought. So obviously it grows in Africa, but it was brought here.
It used to be grown here a lot in South Carolina. It was one of the tiny crops.
Yeah, it looks familiar. It's one like the weeds I got in my yard.
Maybe.
All right, so everybody knows about corn. It's a type of grass. It grows all over. It grows in Africa and Asia, all over the Western Hemisphere. The raw kernels contain oil, starch, sugar, and protein. And one advantage to corn is after you dry the kernels, you can store them for months. And they won't go bad. And here's one, I don't know if you've heard of Jerusalem artichokes. They're not really artichokes, they're like, actually like sunflowers. And they have roots that contain a starch-like polymer of fructose. And you get a fairly good yield. You can get 18 metric tons per hectare, which is reasonably good. And you can grow them around here. And now I'm going to switch to oil crops. And rapeseed grows well in temperate climates. So it'll grow over much of Europe. It'll grow in the U.S. About 70% of biodiesel production comes from rapeseed. In Europe, you see these fields of these yellow flowers everywhere. The seeds contain 40% oil. Most of the varieties contain something called erucic acid, which makes the oil inedible. But years ago, they developed a variety called canola, which is very edible. And of course, soybean, it'll grow around here and all over the U.S. It grows well in temperate climates. The raw beans contain 20% oil and 40% protein. And in the U.S., they're the biggest source of biodiesel. And then peanuts. Takes a warm climate. They grow well in Africa and the southern U.S. And as I mentioned, they were used in the first diesel engine. And another oil source is oil palm. It only grows in tropical areas. The palm fruits contain oil, which you can press out at a very high oil production rate. And I'll come back to the various production rates of these crops. But there's a controversy about cutting down rainforest to plant plantations of oil palms. And another oil crop is called jatropha. It's a small tree or shrub. The oily seeds contain about 30%, 34% oil. It requires tropical or semi-tropical conditions. It tolerates drought. The oil contains toxins, so it's not generally used as food. Chinese tallow is a native of East Asia, but it was imported many years ago to the southern U.S. Some people regard it as a nuisance and invasive species. There's a waxy coating on the seeds, and the interior of the seeds contains oil. A fairly high per acre production rate, although how you harvest the seeds from the tree, I'm not sure a good way to do that. But the potential is there for oil production. And then here's another oil source, which is microalgae, and a number of microalgae have been looked at. One that I think is particularly attractive is called Botryococcus brownii. Up to 85% of the dry weight is oil, which is amazing. It prefers room temperature, somewhat salty water to live in, and if you give it additional CO2, it likes that. So you can couple it with the discharge from a power plant. Now I'm going to switch to talk about some sources of lignocellulose. And one that's proposed is switchgrass. It grows well in U.S., Canada, Mexico. It requires little fertilization. It'll tolerate poor soil. So this has been proposed as a source of fuel. And another source of lignocellulose is rice straw. Quite a bit of it is potentially available. All right, next section is how to rate biofuels. So there are some different ways you can compare them. One is how many gallons of fuel can you get from an acre per year? Another way is how many dollars to produce a gallon of motor fuel. And some countries provide incentives for biofuels or place additional taxes on fossil fuels, which enter into this. Another way you can look at is heat of combustion per gallon of fuel or dollar of fuel. And, but there's some complications here. For instance, how to account for differences in octane number. Ethanol has considerably less energy per gallon than gasoline, but a higher octane. And then there are viscosity issues. For example, you can burn pure vegetable oil in a diesel engine, but there's viscosity issues there which can be a problem. And then another way to look at it is how many gallons of fossil fuel required to generate 1 gallon of liquid biofuel. Another way to look at it is energy balance, how much non-solar energy is consumed to make fuel compared to the energy in the fuel. And another consideration is that one of the reasons for interest in biofuels is reduction of greenhouse gases. So life cycle analysis has been used for this, and I will come back to this. It's somewhat complicated, but for this application, very appropriate.
What's the standard for it?
People, I don't even know that there is a standard. Well, you know, if your particular technology does well in one of these, this is the one this is the one that's important to you. There are a lot of companies and people who are promoting agendas, and I'll come back to that. So it's a complication. Well, I mentioned per acre production for fuels. And so here are a few. Now, the most familiar ones here would be rapeseed, soy, peanut, sunflower. And their productions are in the 60 to 100 range, gallons per acre per year. These are the best numbers because farmers are actually producing these. Some of these other numbers are, somewhat theoretical or very theoretical, or people with agenda are inflated. Here, I mentioned Chinese tallow. It comes in at 100. Palm oil claims that people claim you get 500 gallons per acre per year there. I mentioned jatropha, 73 to 200. Coconut oil, 230. Now, looked at here, algae. These numbers are huge, but these are pretty theoretical. Nobody has, to my knowledge, has an algae pond that's consistently produced anything like this. Here's some more data on oil production. So here's corn. These are liters per hectare, somewhat different. But once again, the palm and jatropha produce a lot of oil, and corn and soybeans a lot less. Okay, now, one way to compare fuels is on energy balance. And as a reminder, this is how much energy out in biofuel you get for gallons worth of energy per gallon. And corn ethanol in the U.S. is not terribly impressive. You get 1.3 gallons equivalent energy out for 1 gallon of fossil fuel. Brazilian sugarcane, much more impressive. You get 8 gallons per gallon. They have a long growing season, perfect climate. Here's biodiesel made in Germany from rapeseed, and it's better than corn, but not as good as sugarcane. And then I've got down here cellulosic ethanol produced in the U.S. We only have some small demonstration facilities for doing this now. And I think this 36 is an extrapolated number. I don't know that we'll want to see this, but there's a potential, there's a good potential for cellulosic.
How's that different from other ethanol? Just regular ethanol?
The final product is the same. It's just what your feedstock is. Yeah, the basic feedstocks are sugar, starch, and cellulose.
You know what the break-even ratio is?
Well,
What would a company have to produce?
Well, now
a
that-
gallon in for, would they get 5 gallons out of 5 times?
right. Well, one way to look at it is just dollars. If they can turn a profit, they don't really care. That's one way to look at it. Some companies look for PR, and so they're willing to accept, maybe lose some money for good PR. So it's a little complicated. But I don't, this 1.3 gallons per gallon, that's just not very attractive. And there are other things about corn ethanol that are not very attractive. So I would think we need to transition away from it to ways that are more desirable.
Like a 0.3 to me wouldn't cover the cost of doing it. You're talking about just energy in and energy out.
Energy in, energy out.
So the
Yeah,
dollar.
that's not an economic
Right,
analysis.
so that 0.3 that you're making profit there wouldn't cover much. To me, it wouldn't seem to.
That's correct. Part of the reason we have corn ethanol still going is government subsidies. And one question would be, really, is it smart to continue subsidizing corn ethanol? And in my opinion, probably not.
You said that was energy in, goes energy out. I thought it was gallons. The way the graph showed was like gallons.
Yeah, equivalent gallons. Equivalent gallons is not, in this case, it's not a gallon of ethanol versus a gallon of...
Okay, so it actually is energy.
It's actually energy.
Okay, fine.
Gallons equivalent translates.
Okay.
Here's another plot which shows energy balance. And this is, the baseline is 1 million BTUs fuel value. So if you have gasoline or diesel, you have to pump it out of the ground, refine it, and transport it. So you have to burn up 1.2 million gallons that you started with to get 1 million gallons to the customer. So here's gasoline, here's diesel, and it's 1.2 million gallons per gallon, which is actually pretty efficient on this.
So you're saying you lose 0.2?
Right, it takes 2.2 to pump it out of the ground, refine it, transport it to the customer. Here is corn ethanol, and you have to put in something like 0.7 of a million BTUs to get 1 million out. Now this green is your solar input, but you have to invest a considerable amount of fossil fuel BTUs to get the 1 million gallons. And this is consistent with this 1.3 to 1. Here's cellulosic ethanol in the U.S. made from corn stalks. And it requires about half as much as fossil fuel input. So that's good. Here's ethanol from wood. Very little fossil fuels required, although you end up consuming a lot of cellulose to get the final product. So that's all this green. And then here's diesel we talked about. And then here's biodiesel. It's much better than ethanol in the consumption of fossil fuel to get the million BTUs.
But it takes a lot of it,
Yeah.
a lot of renewable when we get there.
Yes, you're correct. Yeah. Now, I mentioned life cycle analysis. And
Saves the oil.
one of the drivers for renewable energy biofuels is to reduce release of greenhouse gases. And anything you do releases greenhouse gases. And the big ones are CO2 and methane. So if you do conventional petroleum, so you have to explore, drill, and process, and then finally burn it. So all of these steps release greenhouse gases. And you can get the greenhouse gases in equivalent grams of CO2 per megajoule of energy. So you can do that for any given biofuel. You can do the same calculation, and hopefully there's a percentage reduction, and you can find out what that is. So somebody did a life cycle analysis, and here's gasoline or diesel. So you release 85 grams of equivalent CO2 per megajoule. Look at ethanol. You release more. So this is another reason that ethanol is not, in my opinion, not a good way to go. Here's ethanol made from wheat in the UK. It's better. And here's soy diesel in the US, a little better. Here's rapeseed in Europe, diesel. Here's ethanol made from sugar in UK, and it's a little better. Look at this Brazilian